Morning.
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 Hi, Dan Kahn's here. Who else is here?
Gene Zillman's here.
If you dialed in by phone, you need to hit *6 to unmute. Gene, I can't hear you now.
That's because I'm muted. I can hear you. Muffled, I don't know, barely.
Okay. Okay. Quentin, can you talk?
Yes, hello.
Oh, great. Okay, so you can hear me and you can speak, which is an excellent sign. Chris, you're on?
Yes, this is Chris. I'm here.
Okay, and we have Kwan Yi Ma.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Great. Kwan Yi, which company do you work with?
What? Sorry.
Sorry, do you work with Quentin?
Yeah. I work
Great.
with. Yeah.
Okay, Chris, do you want to paste in the link for your slides and start presenting them?
Sure, I can do that. In the CI working group agenda, I put it on the second list, and I will take the presentation from there and drop it into the Zoom chat area to everyone. There we are. Give a moment for everybody to see that, and then I'm going to see if I can share my screen. It would probably be useful. I'm going to try this. Click on share screen, and let me know if it's visible to everyone. I'll wait.
Yep, I can see your screen.
Beautiful. Before I go through the slide deck, I wanted to go ahead and start the demo so it can happen in parallel to going through the slide deck, because it's kind of boring just to watch the little green lights come on. So this is one of our projects that we're pipeline running with. It's the core DNS pipeline. I'm just going to click on Run Pipeline and choose a particular tag that we're interested in seeing scope, and click Create Pipeline. I'll come back to this later as we let it go and do its thing. So I'll go back over to my slides now. I think I can just hit Present so it looks full screen. So why Cross-Cloud CI? Well, our working group has been tasked with demonstrating the best practices for integrating, testing, and deploying projects within the CNCF ecosystem across multiple providers. Our particular approach, cross-cloud, what is it specifically? We've separated into two main components. Cross-project, which is for each of the CNCF repos, creating pipelines that generate artifacts that we can consume and use in various ways. We combine that with our cross-cloud approach for utilizing those artifacts and deploying them on multiple clouds, including doing end-to-end tests. We have 3 projects today: Prometheus, Core DNS, and Kubernetes. But it's just a start. Eventually, we want to target all of the CNCF projects. For now, we are on 4 cloud providers. We are using GKE, GCE, AWS, and Packet. But eventually, we'd like to target all public, bare metal, and private clouds. Again, back to the cross-project and cross-cloud approaches. Each project repo can have a pipeline where we build the end-to-end test components, compile the binaries, create the packages, and tie that together into a release per commit. When any of these change, it can trigger a cross-cloud pipeline. At the bottom there is our cross-cloud pipeline, which collects all of the artifacts for deploying across the clouds. We do our cross-cloud deployment of Kubernetes. On top of those Kubernetes deploys, we do our cross-project deploys of our projects, and then we do our end-to-end test. These are the 6 repos that are part of this demo today. Prometheus has 3 repositories that compose its Helm chart that we have combined together to produce those different artifacts. Of course, Core DNS and Kubernetes are straightforward. The cross-cloud repo is where we have our cross-cloud container for deploying across multiple clouds. It also has our CI pipeline that combines the artifacts from these other repositories. Here's a little look at the cross-project pipelines for these 3 repos. They do similar things for these 3, building our end-to-end test suite, building the binaries, setting up the containers, and creating a release. Those links can take you to those pipeline builds that are part of that if you want to take a look later. Those artifacts trigger across cloud and end-to-end test pipeline, starting out with the collection of the artifacts, the cross-cloud deployment of Kubernetes across the clouds, the deployment of the projects across those clouds, and our matrix of end-to-end tests. I want to go quickly take a look at our pipeline over here. This is the cross-project pipeline for Core DNS. It has gone through its build, package, and release phase and triggered a downstream cross-cloud deploy. I'm going to go back to our slides and reiterate those points that we just saw. The first stage is the build that compiles the binaries and end-to-end test. The second stage builds tarball containers and pushes those to a registry. And the third stage collects those into an artifact pinning config that we pass on to the downstream cross-cloud. Per commit, we generate binaries that can be downloaded as artifacts and deployed. These are some links to those artifacts for those specific jobs based on the tags you're interested in. We also generate the container images, which anyone could use. They don't have to use our approach for deploying these artifacts. But it's important to see that this set of pinnings allows us to do per commit deploys, combining them from multiple projects, so cross-project deploys at this point. So what can we do with these project artifacts? Our approach was to use a cross-cloud provisioner that we've put together, and that's the pipeline that combines those together, and the provisioner that provisions those. I'm going to go back over to our demo link. I'm going to click on the cross-cloud deploy that was triggered because of the change in core DNS. This has gone through and it's pulled in the CNCF artifacts, including the one we just generated. It's done its cross-cloud deploy, cross-project, and it's working on its end-to-end test. We'll come back to that, but again, it's the demo / slide thing. So back to our slides. These are the 4 stages. The artifacts, where we pull in the configuration to point to each of the artifacts for all of the commits we're interested in. The cross-cloud stage, where we use the Kubernetes artifacts from its pipeline to deploy across our supported cloud providers. And then our cross-project deploys. We deploy each of the projects onto each of our clouds using our Helm charts and using the environment variables pointing to the specific release for that commit. And then we run our end-to-end test on a matrix of cloud and project, including Kubernetes. This is what the cross-cloud artifact stage looks like at a high level. For each of these projects, we're pulling in the URL for the image and the tag. So if you were to run Docker pull and specify Kubernetes image / Kubernetes tag, you would pull down that API or the DNS or the Prometheus image. Our cross-cloud deploy stage uses our cross-cloud repos provisioner, which is a Docker container, per cloud, and it uses the environment variables supplied in this CI job to deploy to AWS, GCE, GKE, and Packet. At the end of this deploy, we have working kubectl and Helm. On the next stage, we deploy each of our projects using Helm, pointing at this repository. We deploy each of these projects to each of those clouds using the artifacts that were collected in the first stage. And finally, we
Chris, we can't hear you now because of the banging in the background.
sorry, can someone stop banging? Thank you. So here's our test suite. We put together, we generate some end-to-end test containers that we deploy in the same way that we deploy our applications, our projects. And here's some of the outputs of that. For Kubernetes, it's a bit different. We're just using the upstream conformance test. And as those finish, they'll update the status in that column, in that last column. We can do some interesting things at some point. Power. We just lost the screen. Just 1 second, I've lost my screen. I think we have a hardware failure on the laptop here.
Let me pull up mine.
Just 1 second. We're going to maybe reshare from Taylor's laptop and finish going through the slide deck. While we're waiting, is there any questions?
Yeah, I had a quick question. Just relating to how much you reuse the existing build and test and deploy scripts that the individual projects themselves use by default. Do you use those, or have you kind of written your own? It sounds like your cross-cloud provisioner, for example, knows how to provision onto all of the clouds itself, rather than using whatever the default mechanism that the project provides. Is that correct?
Yep. We're intentionally separating out the deployment of the cloud so that we have a way to test all of the projects together. There is a good place to put the specific ones for that project separately in the cross-project pipeline for that specific project. Our focus right now is on the cross-cloud, tying all of those projects together in a single status. Our current approach, in order to get to multiple clouds, is to use our cross-cloud provisioner and utilizing the artifacts from Kubernetes. To
okay, so if I understand you correctly, there is the potential to, I'm thinking, Kubernetes has for example, in fact, more than one, I think, automated deployment mechanism to deploy Kubernetes itself, but you don't use those at the moment, although it sounds like the infrastructure provides for the possibility of using those instead of your home-built one.
We have in our in the pipeline here for the cross-cloud deployment section is just one of the components. It's that cross-cloud deployment. We're looking at evaluating other places we can swap that out. We are looking at kubeadmin to be a replacement for that. And we're going to be working more with the Kubernetes testing SIG to not only deploy in a way that's supporting not just their project, but all the other projects as well, including the way that they're building artifacts is changing, particularly, do you remember the name of the build process? Bazel, yeah, so integrating the Bazel approach. I think we talked about that on our last CI call. And
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The reason for my question is that I think all of these projects probably have moving targets with respect to what's required to build them and deploy them. And to whatever extent, I guess you can reuse what those projects are doing already, the less effort you'll have to put into keeping up to speed with what the latest, greatest way of building things is.
Sure, and the cross-project portion, so I think I hadn't got into it. Can you see the slides? It might be useful.
Yes, I can.
We kind of stopped at the cross-project. So I'll kind of visit some of that as we go through this next portion, and then we can kind of come back to the questions.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. That was a good answer.
So in order to utilize upstream as much as possible, we're going to, if for each of these pipelines, have a very simple YAML file that allows us to have similar to Circle CI and these other approaches, where the project itself can be in control of how we are generating and deploying and testing their particular repo. It's when we go cross-project and tying together multiple projects that we're trying to have a larger conversation that would be really useful to find the best approach as we all work together. Our cross-cloud pipeline stages are collect all the artifacts. How far down were we? We got to this point for the cross-cloud deployments. And after we do our cross-cloud deployment, we have a kube config that points to each of our clouds. And then we keep going one more slide. So I think we were here. Yeah. After we do the cross-cloud deploy, we have the Helm where we're deploying that particular project. We started with the Helm charts to decide which of the projects we were going to tie together. And after we do our project deploys, so Helm, Core DNS and Prometheus are now up and running on multiple clouds. On the next slide, we do our end-to-end test. Again, these are deploying our end-to-end test as much as we could model what is available upstream, for example, like Kubernetes. So we're going to try to tie together specifically how we can use existing upstream end-to-end test. This is just a quick tie it together here, some testing. So to summarize again, here's our cross-project pipelines for each project. We want to tie in as much upstream as possible. Ideally, we would love to just add a simple YAML file to each of these repos that is under the control of the project that we can submit PRs to, and it drives their process for per project pipelines. And then all of us can have different approaches for how we're find some best practices for deploying the next part, which is our cross-cloud. This is what our dashboard looks like right now. It pulls together the artifacts for the projects that we're trying to deploy, whether it's the head of all the projects or the stable for all the projects, deploying those stable or head artifacts across multiple clouds, and then the projects on top of those cluster endpoints, and then our end-to-end test. Next slide. So this was a kind of to visit the how are we doing this right now. So our overview is the unified CI/CD platform is GitLab, and again, this is just adding a simple YAML file to each of these repos. Our cross-cloud repo contains this provisioning tool based on Terraform and Cloud Init. At the Cloud Init point, we can do multiple approaches, and we're looking at some different exploring some of that. Going forward, for this phase, our Kubernetes manifest management was with Helm, and so was our E2E test suite for bringing up each of those. Next slide. So what's next? Evaluating some of the upstream provisioning methods so that we can leverage that, looking at some other clouds and possibly some other projects. Anything else? Next slide. So now we're back to questions. Sorry about the hardware interruption. If you'll go on the go to gitlab.cncf.ci.
It's not.
Did you lose connectivity?
No, I'm here. It's just Zoom has taken over.
I made some issues loading that tab. So we'll go to that slide with the links at the bottom. There's our repo, and if you'll click on that link, Taylor, the CNCF one here, and then load that, and you can go to the core DNS project. Or just click on pipelines, actually. All right. That's our demo and where we're headed. If anybody's got any questions, we can review that, or we can, I think we're getting, we have 4 minutes before the halfway point. So turn it over to Huawei.
So Quentin, could you give us your impression of both strengths and weaknesses on this approach?
Yeah, I mean, it looks very, very good, I must say. I mean, it's the first time I've seen what you guys have been working on firsthand. It certainly looks great so far. I'm sure there are lots of little things that we'll need to, figure out along the way. Yeah, I don't see any major weaknesses as far as I can see so far. And it's great that it's sort of decoupled into containers and that these individual pieces of the CI workflow are, individually usable. As you mentioned, one doesn't necessarily need to use GitLab to tie all these pieces together. They're independent containers which can be wired up, using, in theory at least, any other CI process.
Yeah, I agree. The decomposition is a huge value here. Well, that's very encouraging to hear. There's definitely been a little bit of wandering the woods to get to this point, and I think we definitely need to backfill now and have a more detailed design document and such for other people to come in and be able to look at this project and how to extend it and such.
One further comment.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges I see in general, and this is not specific to this approach by any means, but because all of these projects are kind of moving targets, I imagine that actually getting a pipeline like this to be stable, in the sense that, with all the new PRs and things going in, that it will continue to pass and not produce, false negatives, if I can put it that way, where it starts failing because some projects has changed and the infrastructure is not, self-aware enough to incorporate that change properly. But I guess that will only, experience will show us to what extent that's a problem. So I guess it would be interesting to figure out how far away we are from, firing this thing up against the real repositories and actually seeing how easily we can keep it, running and useful.
It's not
It's tied to upstream.
right now. Our we're tied to upstream by syncing every 15 minutes or so, and I didn't show these components because it's one of the other. It's less stable, just like you were mentioning. There was a change in how Kubernetes builds stuff on head, and so that particular configuration for how we do it was failing. So we couldn't actually show that pipeline working. I think until we won't really, like you said, I don't think we'll know the answers to that until we get it up and running. The first pain points I found were things change in how you configure it and build it in the upstream. So it's going to require some conversations ongoing between the project maintainers and successfully following their lead on how to consistently generate their artifacts. When we first looked at this, the reason we have CI dash and the tag name is those tags represent on GitLab or GitHub the specific releases for each of those projects. For me, if they got to the point where it wasn't alpha and wasn't beta, but was their stable release, it was a good place to have a stable starting point. So Taylor, if you're in here, would you mind going to click on the cross-cloud pipeline real quick? The cross link there, and then on the cross-cloud link, just go to the repo, just click on repository, and then on our GitLab CI YAML file, just scroll down and click on that GitLab CI YAML file. At the top of this, you'll see our pinnings for the projects. These are what we considered at the time today to be the stable artifacts that we wanted to follow for this demo. we have another repository. Taylor, if you'll drop down CI stable and go to CI master. Our CI master pipeline actually pulls from master for each of these projects. So pretty much from head. It was about 4 or 5 days ago that we lost the ability without going in and changing everything to get Kubernetes to flow through. And that'll require some revisiting on that. So thanks for bringing that up. I agree, we're gonna have to work on that together.
And to be clear, I think there is value, you know, even if we never got this master one that you have on the screen working reliably, I think just being able to validate that all of the stable releases of all of the CNCF projects actually pass their respective sets of end-to-end tests in this pipeline is independently of value. And we could, you know, ideally we would want this master stuff to work as well. I'm also curious to what extent the tests, I guess you're only running the conformance tests at the moment, is that right?
That's correct, for Kubernetes.
Okay, yeah, I guess my question was just, I'm curious how many of the various, first of all, how many actual tests we end up running, you know, what coverage do these tests represent? And then secondly, you know, how many of them are passing?
Right now, this was primarily a rigging to pull in the artifacts that we generate, because the upstream projects don't currently pull in and deploy all of their artifacts with, like for example, Prometheus doesn't pull together all of their artifacts for their test. They test per repo. And so showing and communicating with the projects that's possible, we're going to try to combine together their current approach for testing one repository pipeline with combining those repositories. The multiple repositories within their project.
Thanks, Chris. This is very, very useful. Very good demo. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Quentin. I'm going to stop sharing and we can hand it over to Mark.
Grania, are you there and available to start your demo?
Yeah, I can demo. Share my screen. Yeah. Do you see my desktop?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. Sorry, I don't have a slide, so I just show my code. We encapsulated the Kubernetes Prometheus CoreDNS build test to a container. Like the Kubernetes, they use the Bazel to use the Bazel as the build tools. So I write a Bazel image, a Docker image. So it has a physical Bazel environment like this. Then I write a component. The component has the Docker container, the Docker image from the Bazel. So also I add the Golang environment. When the container start, it run a program. It will be clone the Kubernetes code into the container and run the build or test action. We transfer the data using the environment variables like this. Is the Kubernetes Git repository, and what we want to build, test, or compile the Kubernetes binary file. Last is the binary file uploaded to a artifact repository. We can run the component use Docker, like use the Docker run command, or use the Kubernetes. We also have some YAML file. We can use the file, use the Kuber control command, run the component in the Kubernetes cluster. Like this, if you want to build a Kubernetes, you must at least have the 8 GB memory and two CPUs. We encapsulate the 3 projects. Then we write a flow file, use the YAML format like this. There have some stages. The first stage is we build a test and compile the Prometheus project. The second stage, we build the RDNS project. So finally, we are testing the Kubernetes project. So let's show how to run. We just use the command. Demo CNCF. So the programmer will read the flow file and start the encapsulate the task to the understand the task to a Kubernetes cluster, and use the Kuber logs collection all the result from the cluster. Now is the first stage is running and build the Prometheus project. It's just it clone the Prometheus Git repository and run the make build command in the folder of the Git. So the different project has the different build tools. We follow the projects and use the original tools. Prometheus and CorDNS used Make, and Kubernetes used Bezos. Now the job is running, and we can see. Build Prometheus container is the pod is already complete, so we can see the result. It's print the result is true, so we can run next job is the make test in the Prometheus Git repository. So I think we encapsulate all the tasks in the container, so everyone can reuse in Docker or the Kubernetes or other, maybe Rocket. And we scale all the tasks in a flow file, and we can run with Kubernetes cluster. We don't care the environment problem. So it's the print the test the Prometheus. And all the code and let's see. The demo container in the Docker Hub, and we have a artifact repository, and you upload it. So it's our demo, and we have the container, and we have the flow, and we execute all the tasks in Kubernetes cluster. Is any question?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. Correct me if I'm wrong. So clearly this demo all ran in a console rather than having any kind of GUI interface. But I understand there is a GUI associated with container ops, and you just haven't set that part of the demo up yet. So we had a discussion prior to this, and I understand that Kwani can do that demo in a couple of weeks' time if we're interested. Is that correct, Kwani?
Yeah, I will demo the GUI next meeting. Yeah.
Okay. And secondly, the tests that are being run here are unit tests, not end-to-end tests. So in particular, I don't think that any part of this demo at the moment is actually building a Kubernetes cluster based on the artifacts that it has compiled, nor is it running the end-to-end tests for any of these things. So that would be the next step, I assume.
Yeah, it's not around the E2E test. And we are working on this, and we want to deploy the Kubernetes banner file to the cloud, maybe DigitalOcean, Google Cloud, and then deploy another Prometheus and CoreDNS, and working together. Then run some cloud native application to test.
Okay, sounds good. So in summary, it looks like the two approaches that have been demoed are approximately the same, in the sense that, you know, all of the stages are configured in some kind of configuration file. They're all built into Docker images, container images, and those are then, you know, wired together with some CI pipeline. In this case, it is container ops. And in the case of the previous demo, it was using GitLab's pipeline. Is that a reasonable, very high level summary of the differences? And clearly this demo is not as progressed as the previous one, in the sense that the cluster build and end-to-end tests are not shown here yet. Neither is a GUI.
Quentin, would you mind just spending 60 seconds on, I'm not quite sure I get the vision of container ops, and I'm totally happy to wait for our call in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever, but I just would love to see the sort of high level aspiration. I mean, would you say that container ops aspires to be a complete replacement for Jenkins?
I think Kwani is probably better equipped to answer this question, but my understanding is that any one of these, I believe they're called stages, can encapsulate essentially anything. Right now they're encapsulating, you know, Bazel build steps and whatever, but they can also invoke Jenkins jobs. So it's not strictly speaking an either or. You can actually use it to integrate multiple pieces of infrastructure that can perform tasks in the workflows.
Okay.
Yeah, Okay. The container ops is designed for encapsulate everything in container and run with Kubernetes cluster. So every stack is encapsulated into a container. It has the environment. It has the input data, use the environment variables, and we can collect output data from the std out. So I think it's a different the Jenkins, and we build the container ops top of the Kubernetes.
Great. Well, I look forward to seeing the full demo over the next month or two.
Yeah, it sounds like, if anything, container ops is similar to that pipeline portion of GitLab that was used in the previous demo. The difference being that it is fundamentally built on top of Kubernetes. So it uses Kubernetes to run all of the containers and get all of the input and output between them and parallelize, etc. Whereas I would guess, and I don't know the GitLab framework at all, but I would guess that it is not built on Kubernetes. It probably runs its own Docker containers or bash scripts or whatever it does to invoke each of those stages and get the outputs and pipe them between each other. Is that correct, Chris?
Actually, each of the stages that we use, its primary driver is a container that we are running on Kubernetes runners.
Not yet, but it is something that we can move ahead and do.
That's right. For this particular patch, we didn't go with running those containers on a Kubernetes cluster because the focus was kind of across cloud. And the GitLab CI itself focuses on using a single Kubernetes endpoint per repo. And we found that to be a bit limiting. We wanted to be able to do multiple kube endpoints per repo.
Okay, so then I misunderstood. Then so then it is the case that GitLab's CI workflow is fundamentally based on Kubernetes as opposed to doing its own container management.
It's pluggable. There's a registry built into GitLab, and we use that registry to run our Kubernetes containers at this point on a runner, but it's just a type of runner. One of the runners is to use a Kubernetes endpoint to run those containers.
Okay, gotcha.
Really interested in seeing if we can overlap in our upstream reuse of the projects. Particularly, I found going through the Kubernetes process, they build their container for doing their build within their build process. And then the very next step, it's all one flow where they use that container to build. And I'd love to kind of make sure that we communicate with the teams from the CI working group mailing list to coordinate some of that over the coming weeks.
Yeah, from my
Quentin,
experience.
oh,
carry on. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Quentin. I dropped out for a second there, but I just wanted to say that GitLab is built on top of Kubernetes, their CI CD pipeline, and interestingly, they're also using Prometheus. And so we've actually talked to them about the possibility of them contributing their project to CNCF. And unfortunately, it looks like we've hit a roadblock with their trademark because for anyone thinking of doing a startup, please call your project something different than your company.
Yeah, it sounds familiar. Yeah, I was just going to mention that, following on from Chris's previous comment, that my observation, I'm no longer an expert on the Kubernetes build and test frameworks, but my superficial observation is that a lot of them are kind of not very well decomposed. So it's not possible to reuse pieces of the flow, as you, I think, alluded to, it's kind of like one big bash script that does, you know, A, then B, then C, then D, then E, and none of those pieces are easily reusable, which I think is the value that both of these demonstrations bring, is to, you know, break these into much more self-contained pieces encapsulated in containers with well-defined kind of data flow between them, so that it's possible to plug and play these things in different ways, as opposed to just run a big fat bash script with a very large number of parameters that tell it what to do. So we briefly discussed the possibility last week of kind of improving the collaboration between these two projects, or at least maybe identifying areas where you're both spending time, you know, solving the same problems, and maybe kind of partitioning that work out more intelligently so that we can avoid duplicate effort. Is there any obvious area to the two demoers, this question goes, where you could perhaps reuse each other's work? For example, creating these containers might be work that both of you have done independently of each other, and understanding how the build processes for all these different projects work in order to encapsulate them into containers. Maybe you can reuse each other's containers.
Quan Yi made some really good first steps in going into Bazel, because we haven't had a chance to look at that yet. It has been mentioned by several folks that that's the build system we will have to use moving forward. So we should have some conversations around how Kubernetes, and there's starting to be a lot more projects using that and build together. I'd love to leverage that work with Quan Yi and his team. We can do that via the mailing list, or we can set up an area to chat. We're on the CNCF Slack.
Yeah, sounds excellent. The other one that occurred to me that in the other direction is that you guys seem to have made good progress on the cross-cloud aspect of it, being able to deploy onto, I think, 3 at the moment, but your ambitions are broader than that. And it doesn't seem like Quan Yi's got to that point yet where he's figured out how to do the standardized deployment onto multiple cloud providers. So that might be an area that he could, you know, consult with you guys to reuse your containers or whatever work you've done there.
That sounds great. There's definitely some input we'd love to have on the cross-cloud provisioner, and integrating multiple approaches, not just the one that we started with, but providing what we need for each of the projects.
Sounds good.
So I want to maybe move away from the demo and try to capture some action items from this so we follow it up in our agenda. Taylor, can you grab that? So it sounds like we want to look at collaborating a bit on our the Bazel approach in the coming weeks to support the new build system. At least have conversations on that, how to do upstream. This will affect primarily the Kubernetes repo and the artifacts that are starting to be split out from that. So Kubernetes has started to get a different kubadmin repo, and as they split those artifacts, a good place that might overlap for us to hang out across project CI folks is the Kubernetes testing SIG. It meets, later today, I forget. We're in the middle of a international transition on time, so I've got to check. But I would say,
yeah, I think it's immediately after this meeting. Actually, it's about half an hour. In half an hour's time, it starts.
Yeah, that's the one. There's some friends of mine from Samsung on there, old friends. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been trying to attend those as much as I can, but there's currently a permanent clash with the Federation working group, so we'll have to move one of the two in order for me to go to both. But yeah, I don't necessarily need to be there, but I agree that there's a fair amount of overlap. And I was there a few weeks ago, and they did kind of actually be good for everyone on this call who's interested to read their, they kind of have a long-term strategic plan document that Eric Fater wrote a couple of weeks ago, which spells out, what they want to do with that group in the next year or two. And there's quite a lot of overlap with what we're doing here. Overlap in a good way, in the sense that their thinking is, I think, largely aligned with this group. And one of the top line items, and this is from memory a couple of weeks ago, was decomposing all of their build and test tools to be more modular and more reusable. So we should definitely go and figure out, to what extent we can contribute reusable pieces to that, and reuse.
Quentin, could you send a link to this to the mailing list, please, with the Federation work?
That document. Sure. I can dig it out and send it to the mailing list. No problem.
Thanks, Quentin.
It's probably on the Kubernetes testing SIG mailing list, but I'll pull it out as well. Send it to this one.
And thanks everybody for coming. I think we're, in respect for time, we should probably go ahead and close up. Thank you, Dan, for getting the Zoom set up and for the recording. We'll meet again in 2 weeks and see everybody on the CI working group mailing list and the CI.
But just before we sign off, let me just please urge both Kuan Yi and Chris, if you guys could update the READMEs of your project so that new people coming to this can get an overview of what you're each doing, it would be incredibly helpful and just not have such a high learning curve for new people diving into this work group later.
Yeah, I agree. And a link to the recording of these demos that we made today from those pages would be super useful for those who want to kind of get a crash course in it. One other
we'll be uploading this to YouTube and circulating to the list. Yeah,
and I would put it in the README files for those projects as well, just so that people who stumble across the project will be able to go and watch them. Minor admin issue or question here. I have a calendar invite, which I think I sent out a month or so ago to everybody, which has an old link to the old Hangouts. Is there a new calendar invite with this link in it? And because I don't seem to have received that, I wanted to figure out how we distributed the new calendar stuff.
Great. Yeah, so I will send a new calendar invite to CNCF CI Public with the Zoom info on it. There is an issue though, which is that normally we would meet on July 11th, but the TUC has moved their meeting there so it doesn't interact with the July 4th holiday. So I think we should actually probably just cancel our meeting on the 11th, unless people wanted to just move it back an hour would be the other possibility. And it would be 9 a.m. Pacific instead of 8 a.m. And then we'll get back to the regular meeting time on July 24th.
My suggestion would be that we just cancel. It seems like we've got more than enough work to keep us busy for a month. And then hopefully we'll have a more comprehensive demo from Kuan Yi in 4 weeks' time instead of 2.
Okay. Yeah. So Quentin, if you could cancel your meeting invite, and folks, please look for the meeting invite I'll be sending out momentarily.
Do we not just want to update the link in the existing meeting invite just to avoid confusion between multiple of them?
It's just the one I'm going to be sending is going to come from the CNCF public calendar. And so it's just a better source going forward is mine.
Okay, fair enough. I'll send out a cancellation on the old one. And as soon as you've sent out the new one, just so that I can cross-reference it too.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Thanks very much, Quentin. Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you. Yeah.